So welcome to tonight's event. My name is Dominik Reich. I'm here the head of the program line Events and Awards. And I welcome you very, very warmly to tonight's event that is titled Happy Hour for Bubbles, Misinformation and Fake News. Can we still prevent a post-factual democracy? And I'm very honored and very happy that we have today with us Professor Vincent Hendricks, who's going to be introduced by Henriette Litta in a few minutes. She's going to do the moderation of tonight's evening, and she's the managing director of the Open Knowledge Foundation, like of the German chapter of the Open Knowledge Foundation. Just one or two comments on today's evening. We're going to start with an introduction or like some input of Vincent Hendricks, and then there is going to be a moderated discussion between Henriette Litta and Vincent Hendricks for around 15 minutes. So I would say at like 6:30. And then it's also time for you to ask your questions either in the Q&A section, so written, you can see this down in the panel line, or you're gonna ask your questions orally. Then please use the raise hand function. You can find it also in the panel line, and then our moderation will call you, will unmute you, and you have to like unmute yourself as well, and then you can ask your question. Yeah, and last but not least, we will record the event. So also the questions you're gonna ask orally are going to be part of it. If you're not fine with this, just also gonna let us know. And I would say, yeah, I wish us a great evening, and I give the floor to Henriette. Henriette, welcome that you're here tonight with us. Vincent, it's great to have you here with us, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and inviting me. Welcome from my side, and let me just start with introducing tonight's speaker, Professor Vincent Hendricks. Professor Hendricks has been a professor of philosophy at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark since many years, since 2009. He has been trained as a philosopher in Denmark and achieved his PhD a long time ago in 1997 with a dissertation on epistemology, methodology and reliability, and his habilitation in 2004. He has an impressive, in my regard, record of academic achievements, including research awards, prizes, grants, and visiting positions in very renowned universities abroad, especially in the US. And I see in his record that he has published a lot, and I mean a lot, on fake news and misinformation and social media, obviously, that's why we are here, but also, that's also very interesting, on identity politics, on logic and philosophy, on digital literacy, and also including here educational materials. Perhaps we could speak about that later too. He has a very recent book from 2018 co-authored with his colleague Mes Westergaard on fake news, which is available in German, postfactual, and it's a very good reading, and it's a pre-Christmas season, so perhaps you're looking for something, this might be the one. And you can also download the entire book as a free PDF, but in English. So you can buy it in German or get it for free in English. That's the advertisement. Professor Hendricks is definitely not restricted to activities in his academic bubble, but is very engaged largely and enthusiastically in outreach activities as media appearances, TED Talks, events, and he has also a podcast on topics on digital democracy and in the information age, but it is in Danish only. So for those who were able to understand the language, they can enjoy this one. And since 2015, he is the director of the Center for Information and Bubble Studies, CIPS, I guess is the short term, at the University of Copenhagen, a unique interdisciplinary center for studying the post-factual democracy. And this is my introduction, Professor Hendricks. I'm very excited to hear your insights, and now the virtual floor, as we say in the Zoom age, is yours.
Well, thank you so kindly, and thank you for allowing me to present some of the material here and have the discussion with you. I'm going to be talking about attention economics and fake news. It's, as Henriette said, based on this book. It's called Reality Lost. Markets of Attention, Misinformation, and Manipulation. Came out in 2019 in English. It came out in 2018 in German. It's called Postfactual. Here it is. You pay for the German version. The American version is free. This is open access, and I believe you already got the link. So if you're interested in having more, you can basically just download the book for free. I should tell you, though, to the ones of you who are German, that it came out in German in 2018, and we were actually nominated for the Best Science Prize in Germany, but we lost. However, we only lost to one book, and that was Hans Rosling's Factfulness. So I was like, okay, I'll live with that. That would be, that's perfectly fine. Coming in second to Hans Rosling is certainly fine. Okay, so I have been instructed that I have a 15-minute presentation, and then Henriette and I are going to pinball things back and forth, and then we open the floor for your questions and comments and other installments. That being said, the entire idea of this book, Reality Lost, a Postfactual, is basically to uncover the structural conditions for a market of fake news. Now, of course, the term fake news and in it by itself disputable. What does it exactly mean? And so in the book, we actually define what we mean by fake news as an information product. But I'll take you back first to 1971. And the reason why 1971 is a pivotal date, besides the fact that I was 1 year old in 1971, that only goes to show how old I have become. In 1971, Herbert Simon, who received the Nobel Prize, as you might know, in 1978. He's a psychologist, but got the Nobel Prize in economics in 1978. In 1971, said something very prophetic about an age in which you have a lot of information available. So it's sort of, in a certain sense, prolific to the times in which we live. He said, and I quote, in an information-rich world, you're going to find a scarcity of something else. It'll be a scarcity of whatever it is that information consumes. But what information consumes is pretty obvious. It consumes the attention of its recipients. And there you have it. In the information age, it's not Microsoft or oil, which is the assets, the real assets. In the information age, it's our attention as an asset, or we usually talk about it as a cognitive resource, and of course it is. But we haven't really picked up on the fact that you could also understand attention as an asset. But it's a particularly elusive sort of asset, because right now on my screen, I'm looking at Henriette, but then again, I'm not looking at Dominique at the same time, so I can't look at both and pay the same amount of attention. And remember, and look at the term in English, it's called to pay attention to. Now, I'm not exactly sure how it is in German, but in English, it's something that you pay and you get something in return usually. Now, what Herbert Simon is really telling us is that information is what occupies our attention, and our attention is basically a gateway to our consciousness. So you can sort of see that once you have our attention through allocating information, you got yourself a gameplay. And in many ways, once you look at it from that perspective, it becomes pretty obvious that, of course, a lot of us have a profile on social media, yeah. But and there is an argument out there to the effect that since we all have a voice, there's something inherently democratic about the social media and the web. Now, once you reflect upon what Herbert Simon is really telling us, that is BS. It's not about having a voice. It's whether your voice is being heard. Now, usually we think of, so there's a lot of assets out there. For instance, our intelligence is an asset, and our body build is an asset, and there's a lot of assets, personal assets. And our attention is also, in a certain sense, a personal asset. But you should realize this, as opposed to intelligence or height or weight or other personal characteristics, if you look at attention distribution online, it does not follow a normal distribution, which means it is not so that the bulk of us can sort of receive and send or allocate and receive the same amount of attention. Attention is not distributed according to normal distributions. Attention is distributed according to power loss. And that means that there is a certain few actors out there that have far the bulk of attention, and then the tail becomes thinner and thinner, and the rest of us are lying out in that tail that ever slimmer tail of the power law distribution. That goes microscopically if you look at who have the most followers online. And if you don't know, I will tell you that the person in the Western Hemisphere with most followers on social media is not Donald J. Trump, and is not Barack Obama, and is not Mother Teresa, although of course she passed. It's Cristiano Ronaldo, 321 million followers. Second comes Justin Bieber with about 283, Taylor Swift number 3, Ariana Grande, Shakira, Kim Kardashian West, and if you look at the top 10, it's Cristiano Ronaldo on top with 321, and at 193 million is Beyonce. Below Beyonce, you're losing out followers pretty fast. But that only goes to show that there's a few big actors out there who have far the bulk of attention, and then there's the rest of us. That goes microscopically. If you look who have the most followers, it is also true macroscopically if you look at who actually has the bulk of traffic on the web. And so 90% of all traffic on the web is between 5 to 10 actors, a little bit of pertaining to how you actually count the conglomerates. And you know well who they are: Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, Amazon is a big player for attention in the attention market. And also, of course, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon. They have about 10% or 90% of all traffic online. And you should realize this, as the Matthews principle is playing out here, namely the ones who have a lot will give it even more. So when Facebook felt threatened, what did they do? They bought Instagram, they bought WhatsApp. What about Google? They acquired YouTube, or Alphabet acquired YouTube. And what did Amazon buy 3 years ago, which was a little unusual if you think about the portfolio that they usually deal in. If you have been buying things on Amazon, you buy books or spark plugs or hula hoops or chest freezers, take your favorite pick. But 3 years ago, Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon.com, acquired a product which is sort of unusual for the portfolio that he usually deals in. And if we were in a classroom, I would ask you, what did he buy? But I'm going to tell you, since we are online, he actually bought the Washington Post. He owns the Washington Post, journalists, cameras, computers, infrastructures, a lot. And then you could say, so who cares? I mean, spark plugs and chest freezers is one thing, and news is another thing. But as you might know, 2 years ago, Donald J. Trump got really, really angry with the Washington Post over something that they wrote about him. And of course, he has been doing so routinely. But instead of directly sort of attacking the Washington Post, he did something else. He tweeted out on Friday that Amazon.com was actually screwing with the competition pertaining to bringing out parcels in the US relative to United States Postal Services. And Monday morning, according to USA Today, Amazon.com lost $60 billion in share value. So it's an indirect way of hitting on Amazon or Washington Post by hitting Amazon.com. Now, what would that tell you? Well, it'll tell you one thing. I mean, in this information market, there's a lot of services, a lot of products out there, and they're all intertwined in odd ways. The tech giants are sort of expanding their portfolio. Of course, Facebook wants Libra, you know. Amazon.com wants to do movies. The biggest producers of movies today is not Warner Brothers or Sony Music, it's Netflix. And so just to tell you that this information market is extremely amphibious, and it's organic in a way that you're opening up in a lot of other information products. And here we have it. Because going back to Herbert Simon, now we know that attention is not normally distributed. It's a zero-sum game when I use it, because when I look at Henriette, I'm not looking at the rest of you nor Dominique. So I'm burning all my attention on Henriette. There's nothing left for you. And so it's a zero-sum game when I use it. Why do you think there's a concept called FOMO, fear of missing out? Well, it's because the entire point of all of this exercise is that the business model of the social media is very simple. Get users to generate some information that other users will spend their attention on, then take that attention and those data and sell it, curate it, big data analyze it, and sell it to the ones that are really paying for it, the advertisers. But that would basically mean that the users are the products. Now that gimmick is from the 50s when you introduced TV. People were well aware of this, but now it is turned onto steroids because there are so many products out there. Facebook has 3.2 billion products in their portfolio, and they can curate their data as they please. And what Herbert Simon also reminded us is that I can't take my attention and put it in the bank and save it for a rainy day. It doesn't aggregate. So once I burn it, I burn it. And since there are 200 trillion tweets a year, 6 billion pieces of information are being shared on Facebook every day, 500 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute, and 100 million hours of video are being streamed on Facebook on a daily basis. And then I didn't take the Schwarzkopf website. I didn't take Encyclopedia Britannica. One thing that is unique to our age today is that we have information in abundance. Of course, we say that every age is different, that every generation has a new set of challenges, and I agree with that. But there is one particular feature of this day and age that is new to humanity. We have never, and I mean never, had so much information available. But we don't have more attention though. The amount of attention is still limited. It's a scarce resource, and we don't have any extra hours. So you can see how the battle on information and attention is extremely fierce these days, especially when you also factor in the business model of the social media. And then what Herbert Simon is telling us is it's about having a voice. It's not about whether it's about having a voice. It's not about, it's about being heard, sorry. It's not about having a voice. So the question is, what sort of information are people willing to spend their precious attention on? And we know a little bit or quite a bit about that. And it turns out, not too surprisingly, that if things sound spectacular, if they sound too good to be true, then that's usually what we spend our attention on. In a certain sense, we are suckers for the spectacular. We are suckers for mobilizing a certain set of emotions in us, which are named activity mobilizing sentiments. Some of you might have learned or know Jonah Berger, who's an American marketing professor, who a couple of years ago wrote a very important book called Contagious, where he shows if you can feed into people's what's called activity mobilizing sentiments, anger, fear, indignation, those sort of emotions tend to get a lot of traction online. Those posts tend to get a lot of traction or a lot of social transmission. And so basically what I want to say, that what Jonah Berger is also showing in his studies is that it is not a necessary condition for a piece of information to go viral that it is true. So whatever is true is not necessarily viral, and whatever is viral is not necessarily true. Now, that paves the way for a stronghold of subprime information products, which are not true per se, or if they are, it's only from a certain perspective, or they have been framed, or you can do cherry picking. There are a million ways in which you can sort of fiddle with the truth. But their characteristic is that they can allocate scores and scores of attention. So if attention is scarce and information in abundance, then you can speculate in what sort of information people are willing to spend their precious attention on, and then transmit that out into the channels. And that goes to show that in the information market, the way it is set up on top of an attention economy, then there is a market for subprime information products that can allocate scores and scores of attention independently of whether they're true. And that is sort of the big problem of the information age from a structural economic perspective, is that it leaves the possibility of actually speculating in wrongful information that allows scores and scores of attention. And it's not for fun, and then I'll stop. It's not for fun to say that misinformation on the web, according to the World Economic Forum, is a global challenge, according to them. That means on par with climate change, on par with global health, on par with inequality, gender, et cetera, et cetera. And basically they say, well, because it can undermine a kind of democracy that we surely like. It's called, or kind of government structure that we certainly like, namely democracy. And why? And then I'll shut up. It's because ever since the Enlightenment, the entire point of the Enlightenment on which the information age is sort of riding is the idea that you should give the citizen, the individual, more adequate information available. And on that basis, they could make more qualified decisions as to what cell phone to buy next, to who to vote for in the election. But had they known that you could tamper with information in such a way that it is not about whether the information is true, that's not a necessary condition for proliferation, but it's whether or not people will engage because you basically speak right to their sentiments, then probably they would have dreamt themselves back to the dark Middle Ages that they were actually ambitious about giving people more information available. Now, that means that in the end, there is a streak for what we end up with in the book for post-factual democracy. And by that, we mean a democracy in which politically opportune but incorrect information is the basis for political decision, action, and deliberation. And once we are there, then of course, clearly the democracy will have some really tough terms. There are ways and things we can do about it. I'll leave that for the discussion session with Henriette, but I hope you can see that there is a set of structural condition in an information market that is very hospitable to certain kinds of attention bubbles, whether it's build a wall, lock her up, QAnon, conspiracies, you take your favorite pick, they all allocate lots and lots of attention independently of whether they're true. And that is one of the major problems of the information age per se. And with those words, I think my 15 minutes is up.
Thank you so much. There was a lot in a short period of time. So yeah, let me just start with a simple question then. Who's to blame for this situation? Who's to blame for information, misinformation, for the bubble? Is it us, or is it what you call in your book, you cite Shoshana Zuboff, right. Surveillance capitalism, of course, the corporations, is it the algorithms, or who is to blame?
Well, of course, that's a good question, Henriette. It's a difficult question to answer. And the reason is there's so many moving parts in this equation, right? So they're the users, that's us. They're the tech giants, that's another. Politicians are a third. So there's a lot of moving parts in this. But look at the way in which the market is set up. Then what I was saying, at least in the beginning, was that the business model of the social media is pretty simple. And that business model, although it is simple, has sort of been running along in the press. But the entire idea, as Zuboff says, about surveillance capitalism is actually a pretty recent concept, you realize. I mean, that business model is recent, insofar as to say it was Larry Page, who started Google, and Peter Thiel, who came up with who also was a big tech philanthropist, who around 2000 came up with the idea. You realize that before 2000, Google did not have commercials. It didn't have commercials. But from 2000 until 2001 until 2003, they implemented the model that you allocate people's attention, you take their data, you curate it, and you sell it or rent it out to the advertisers. Once they figured that model, and that was before Facebook even started, you realize, then their growth rate between 2001 and 2004 was 3,495%. I mean, it went like rocket science. It rocketed. And then Facebook started in 2004. Facebook did not have positive, or they didn't have positive numbers on their spreadsheets before 2011, 2012, when Sheryl Sandberg moved from Google to Facebook and implemented that model. So the entire idea of surveillance capitalism or digital totalitarianism, which is sort of the ideological version of that, is a very recent thing for us, Henriette. And I think it's fair to say that we are in part guilty ourselves as users, insofar as we agree that our data can be used for whatever purpose which is intransparent to us. And the tech giants are certainly also responsible. And for a long time, they have not wanted any editorial, editorial obligations in any way, simply because that is the bad for their business model. And the politicians have not known what on earth they were dealing with. You realize one thing, though, that the Americans have been pretty good, and I'm part American. On the way through industrial history, they have been very good using antitrust. But as you know, so you break up companies if they become too big or too influential. But they actually allowed that Google acquired YouTube. But you should realize that the biggest search engine today is not Google. The biggest search engine today is YouTube. You search for music. If your iron is out of order, your chest freezer doesn't work, you go to YouTube to find a video. So it's not just about sharing videos, it's a search engine. And they have been very bad at figuring out the business model of the social media. And as you remember, when Mark Zuckerberg was in the Senate in 2016 discussing the problem about fake news and misinformation during the 2016 election, Orrin Hatch, who's a governor or senator, sorry, from Indiana, I believe, or Utah, was asking Zuckerberg. It turned into a meme afterwards where he goes, how do you make a business going when people don't pay for their profiles? And as you remember Zuckerberg saying, Senator, rerun ads. So even the political body had no idea of what they were dealing with. So between the users as product, the tech giants implementing surveillance capitalism, and the politicians not knowing what on earth they were dealing with, there is the culprit of the problem. That was a long answer, sorry.
No problem. In your answer, you also mentioned you and me, or the consumers. So, and then of course I would say like, but it's not you and me, it's always the others, right? I mean, it's never us who are manipulated in the perspective of users. And we never fall for false information or misinformation. It's always another group. Right. So, and talking these days in Corona times about immunity is a big topic. Is there such thing as immunity, or is it just a perception that I feel I'm immune? Of course, it's always the others.
Well, I'm sorry to ruin your parade, Henriette. Nobody is without a certain nobody's without a certain influence. And the basic reason is that there's some of this stuff you don't even have control over, right? So you have to realize that most of the social media systems are based on recommender-based systems. That means that you basically get more of the same, either from your network or from a ranking or whatever user they're making. And that you cannot control. And it's part of the business model because that's simply the best way of generating data. There's none of us who are on any platform, social media, whatever, who do not accept the cookies, who do not allow them to tap the data. But of course, we are never being told what that data is used for. But I can guarantee you this, they're used for profiling. And the reason is simple. And Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google until 2011 or 12, I think, he was very blunt about it. He's like, look, I don't think that people really want to search things on Google. What they want is, they want Google to tell me what I gotta do next. So it's all about, the reason why data is important is because data can be used for prediction. And once that you can use it for prediction, you can predict what the users want before they want it, they know themselves. And that is another word for control. Now there are two different modes for this. You can go the Chinese way where you're very upfront about it and say, look, we're gonna tap all the data we can get because we want to control, we want a social credit system so we can control the citizens. That is extensionally pretty much the same that the social media platforms have been doing in the States. They have been tapping the data to predict what sort of products the users want. The only problem is, of course, Henriette, whether it's political products or chest freezers, It's just a matter of degree. I mean, it's not, so just to say, the way things are set up now, and in the way in which the recommender-based systems model of making money on social media is set up now, there's no really escaping. And you can't say to Google or Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or WhatsApp, Twitch, whatever you're using, I want my data, I want the data to be mine, and if you use it, I want to know to what end. That has not been implemented yet. And until then, data is everything. It's everything, because it's prediction power.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's the big thing on these days, and it's what everybody wants to acquire or regulate, and that's the problem. I see here in the question part of the seminar that some of our participants have similar questions that I would have. So I would read a bit, and then we merge into the more interactive part, and I invite everybody to either write questions to the chat or raise their hand on Zoom with the Zoom function on raising their heads, so we can dive more into topics more related to bubbles or to democracy. I think here we can go on. So one question that here I can see is Monica is having, and Nastasia also, regards, of course, how you say there's no escape, but what are some strategies? How can we get out of our own bubbles, or is my own information bubble? What can I do? And also,
sure.
yeah, I leave it at that.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, it's a little bit like reading papers, right? I mean, just ask yourself, if you read papers either online or you buy yourself Die Zeit or Le Monde or The Guardian or whoever. Question one is, do you read the papers that you politically disagree with or agree with? And then, then usually people say, well, at least I read the one I agree with. And then the next question you got to ask yourself is, okay, but not only should I read the one I agree with, I should read the one I disagree with, and then I should pick a third source, which is a function of what I agree and disagree with, and then I should triangulate those three sources and then make a decision as to what to do. And then, of course, you would never get out of the bed in the morning. You couldn't even enjoy the morning coffee, because just making a qualified decision on one stance would take you the entire day, right? So what I'm trying to say is, and I'm not the only one saying this, James Taplin has been saying some of the same stuff, is cool it pertaining to what you have a qualified opinion with, okay? So whenever you see something online, I say, I better react to that. Unless you have a qualified opinion, just don't. And the reason why I'm saying it is basically, you're just adding to the chatter, you're adding to the traffic, but either way you give away data. So if you have to give away data, do it on something that you find you got qualification in saying something about, otherwise just leave it be. That's issue number one. And then I think issue number two is, and we are beginning to see that, two things. One is that our government, and the German government in particular, but also the EU and the UK and even Denmark is coming along with this, is to say, is it fair that whatever is the backbone of the business model of these social media giants, we don't even get asked about the data? We don't even know what it's being used for. We are the one generating it. We are the products on the shelves, and we don't know. And so what you are seeing now are political movements to the effect of regulation, right? In terms of, say, well, if it smells like press and it sounds like press and it tastes like press, well, maybe it's press. So why does The Guardian have to meet standards of journalism where Facebook doesn't have to? They're doing the same thing. So there's also a political movement to the effect that that we should realize, and I think that is one thing that we didn't figure out, but it's dawning on us now, namely that about 90% of all political discussion is not happening on where people meet on Brandenburger Tor or on the Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park or in Central Park Corners to discuss politics. That's what's going on online. And so basically our democratic infrastructure now, and this is weird, if you had asked Kant and Rousseau and Montesquieu, that means all the classical Enlightenment thinkers, whether public space, that means where our discussion and deliberation and deliberative democracy is going on, whether that should be on private hands, they would have said, are you losing your freaking mind? Are you joking me? Of course not, because there should not be pecuniary interest in public space. And so even the social media platforms now are beginning to understand, Jesus, we are playing a huge role in democracy here. We are providing the infrastructure of democratic debate. Maybe we should be more careful. So last year in October, Jack Dorsey, who was the CEO of Twitter, said, look, no more political advertising on Twitter. If you want to have impact, you're going to earn it with your ethos, right? YouTube recently decided that all channels pertaining to QAnon should be banned from their platform. Facebook is doing similar stuff. They installed a scientific content oversight committee, just to say that there are now movements between citizen politicians and also tech giants to actually try to see, is there a way in which we can clean up public space such that deliberative democracy have better conditions? But, and I will agree with Monica on this one here, this is not something that we are going to do like this. This is going to take a generation. It's a systemic problem here. It's just like climate change. It's just like world health issues. It's just like, you realize this, once things become systemic, and World Economic Forum have said misinformation on the web is a systemic problem. OECD have been saying similar things. The UN has been saying similar things. We are talking, these things happened within the last 15 years, 20 years. Getting a viable model going, which is in an equilibrium state for deliberation, is going to take a lot of change, just like climate change, just like Corona. Corona is a big systemic problem. We're getting maybe to get in a vaccine, but realize how much coordination we need to get this far. And just to say, we're talking in the long haul here for these sort of problems to solve themselves, or for us to solve them.
Yeah, that's true. And on a global scale, but also for Europe, of course, we are pretty late to the game, right? But the discussions have intensified. And here it's, you could do something on the regulatory frame. And now I think the European Union has started to see we need to cut those monopolies and see what where we could regulate with our power. And also the other side, of course, is, and there's a growing awareness in populations bottom up, is a personal choices, what choices to have. And there are not many. I mean, we have to be true. You want to use tools which are very user-friendly and nice to see and easy on the iPhone, of course. And right. So you need, if you need to find something, Google is very fast. But of course, there's alternatives, alternative search engines. You can have, yeah, I mean, different social media accounts. You can have anti-tracking add-ons. You can also have what you mentioned, a balanced news aggregator. So I think you can make personal choices to escape this game, but only to a certain point, because then you need more power from the governance perspective to back you up. Because I mean, in this field, you against the big tech giants, you have no chance, of course. But there's always something you can do. And that was also a question here from one of the participants, what you can do on an individual basis. And I think also it was mentioned here, open source technologies could help to be an alternative to monopolizing data ultimately, but also information and what is happening with your data. So,
and I think there's one more thing, as many of you, I'm assuming all of you know, in the Schwarzkopf-Stiftung, realize one thing, namely, so I don't have to rehearse all the 17 UN goals, but let me just rehearse the final one. It's a funny thing if you look at it, right? It's about clean water, it's about good conditions, about health. But the 17th goal is very simple. It's called new partnerships. Right. And so basically, and that, I think that's the most visionary goal of all of them. It's basically to say, look, if we're looking at global challenges from water shortage to global health to gender equality, take your favorite pick. We're going to have to introduce new partnerships between NGOs, government institutions, private companies, otherwise this is not going to happen. And so I think we are looking into a world in which so my son is 20 now, right? And so he's looking, and so the next generation is looking into a world where the way in which we're going to solve a lot of these problems are by having ambassadors like the Schwarzkopf Foundation, in which new ties are forged between government, NGO, and private institutions, because neither one of them can do it alone without ending up in the prisoner's dilemma. So basically, just to say that what we are looking at now is a whole generation of new activists who are able to forge the ties between politics, government, private enterprising, and science. Those three together. And all of you out there who are maybe listening, all of you might only be the three I can watch on the screen, but be that as it may, I think you should think about yourself, the way in which we're going to solve these problems. Are we going to have to need scores and scores of ambassadors with the same goal, working from different angles to the same end? Because that's the way you solve global problems. And of course, it's a funny thing though, right? Because I'm 50 now, I'm not going to feel the bulk of the pain of misinformation gone on haywire, climate change, global change, and all that. I'm going to die before that happens. But I leave all this stuff to my son, and I'll be damned if I'll be the first generation in human history leaving a world to the next generation, which is in a worse shape than the one I received from my parents. And if we're not careful and realize we're in a corona crisis now, do you think climate change took a sick leave, or that misinformation went on vacation? They're running in parallel, and now we're just focused on one because our attention has been there, but all the others are running. So the next generation is going to be a set of ambassadors, from activists to scientists, with the same global goals, working together in new constellations that we have probably never seen before. That's the only way out of this issue.
That's a great pledge. It's always good, new partnerships. Here I have somebody from our participants who is especially thanking you for your great voice. So I want to mention that as well. And also asking the question, he thinks many of our problems stem from the incompatibility between our expectations to be well informed and the capabilities to consume and order everything. Therefore, he thinks we culturally need the right to be exhausted.
Yeah. Well,
does that sound reasonable to you? And do you think it would help?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Ruben. Look, isn't it interesting to think that in the old days, it was the very wet dream of any dictator to deprive the citizens of information qualifying their decisions. Now today is the opposite model. Just pour information on them until they polarize according to their initial inclinations and rule accordingly. That's what you see in Brazil. That has been Donald Trump's agenda all along. Pour it on them until they polarize according to their predispositions. And I agree with you, Ruben, you can be exhausted, and you're allowed to be exhausted, but you're not allowed to be non-ambitious because you're exhausted. What I'm trying to say is basically, this is going to be a steep climb uphill. But I'll tell you this, if you don't do, it's not going to get done, and it's going to get worse. And we have only seen the start of it. So yes, I think it's fair to say that you are allowed to get exhausted. But one of the reasons why you're exhausted, Ruben, is because, or might be, I shouldn't speculate here, but your attention is being tracked and is being traded all the time. Look, here's a cell phone, okay? remember when the Corona crisis hit the entire world, we were asked to use hand sanitizer and mouthpieces and all that. And why? It's because the average human touches its own face 3,000 times a day. So be careful the way you do it, right? That's the reason why we had to use hand sanitizer. There are studies out there that shows that the average user of a cell phone touches the cell phone 2,600 times a day. So you touch yourself in the face as much as you touch your cell phone. And I guarantee you in this, you don't touch your partner 2,600 times a day. So this has basically become now part of your body. Now, once you have external body parts, you've got to be very careful by the way in which you use it. It's sort of like being a prosthetic, but it's a prosthetic with a tracking system. So what I'm trying to say basically is every time you pay with your attention, make sure you get something out of your investment. And if not, you're the sucker. And the funny thing is, and then I'll shut the hell up, right? You know, if I ask all of you out there who's sitting there in cyberspace right now, whether or not you consider yourself to be, you know, autonomous individuals making qualified decisions about everything from what cell phone to buy next to what party to vote for in the upcoming election in your respective countries. I'm assuming that most of you would say, yeah, I think I'm pretty autonomous that way. But all the clandestine tricks that has been implemented in Las Vegas and adjusted for the past 100 years are right here on your phone. So basically just to say, don't fall for the fact that you think you're autonomous just because in the immediate environment, you don't think that this model of business is running. It's running, and it's running fast. Just to say, whenever you decide to pay with your attention, make sure you get something out of your investment. And maybe, Ruben, that is also a way for you to get less exhausted.
Yeah, one more question from me out of curiosity. Perhaps, do you already have an account on Parler?
No, I don't have accounts on any social media.
Not for research?
Huh?
Not for research?
Yeah, I have shadow profiles.
Okay.
But I don't have personal profiles. The Center for Information and Bubble Studies does have a Facebook profile, but I don't. And you're right, I do have shadow profiles for research, but I don't have personals.
Okay, because Parler, of course, as you know, is in the US the next big step into the bubble world, where it's even more extreme and even more out of touch of reality, I would say, in my bubble, of course. And so this is also some of the questions that were raised here in written, of course, reference to the US, yeah, which we see here from Germany or from a European perspective, of course, as a dystopia or a way not to follow. How can we prevent such extremes to happen, that it's so obvious lying and untruth? Sure. And we would think that we are so educated that we will never fall for something like this, right, but we are not.
Well, look, I mean, well, I recommend if you want to know more about that, I mean, this book will tell you some of it, but let me give you the gist of a few things. Namely, we should be worried in Europe here as well. There's nobody who's immune to any of this. But you should also remember that we are talking two very different systems. Also, parliamentary systems, right? I mean, even in most of the countries, and forgive me, I don't know where you're from around the world in this session, but just think of your own country. In Europe, suppose you have multi-party systems, and multi-party systems are actually very good in terms of not getting fake news and misinformation on steroids. And the reason is that you can share certain views with certain parties, other views with other parties, and then there's a non-empty intersection between the two. So you're not forced to a two-horse race. That's what you have in the US. So if you're for Trump, you're against Biden. If you're for Biden, you're against Trump. That's not the way in which parliamentary systems work in Europe. And so we are not always forced out into a two-horse race. And it makes it a little more difficult to make these very designed fake news misinformation campaigns, turns out. Another thing that's good about Europe is that we usually share a certain set of ideas. So for instance, Denmark, even the most left-wing party and the most right-wing party agree to one thing. We have to secure and maintain a welfare system. And if you have that and you want that, then you have to agree on quite a bit. We have fiscal budget discussions in Denmark right now. You know what's funny about all that? 99% of the entire budget is already allocated to wanting the welfare system. Politics are made on the one last percent of that budget. It means very little. And so I guess it's like, and one of the things that you get out of your pay when you pay your taxes is a reasonably robust agreement on certain values, say welfare system, public service, money for media, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a certain system set up which doesn't polarize all that easily. Of course, we have seen, and also in Germany, you have seen polarization massively over the last year. France has seen the same. I don't know, you know why, especially because of influx of foreigners and the way we should deal with that. Same goes for Denmark. But everything else being equal, our parliamentary system, our welfare agreement, etc., makes for a fairly robust system. But it's not, you can still attack it. But that also only goes to show that the ambassadors should also make sure that these systems remain intact. And let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, that's a lot of work. You realize our understanding of democracy springs from the Enlightenment. That's 500 years ago, at most. As a species, we have been around for 200 and 250,000 years. So our idea of an equilibrium state in which the community and the individual are balancing off their preferences, ideas, etc., is totally new to us as humans. It's 500 years ago at best, and we are still working on it. So it's still in progress. And that's just to say that this thing about democracy is not something that we have too much experience with. And also, we have to maintain it on a daily basis. And this session that we are having now, as if I understand the Schwarzkopf Foundation ambition, is part of that ambition.
Yeah, great. You speak of enlightenment, and as a philosopher, of course, you know Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote the social contract. And right. These days, global protagonist of digital transformation, Francesca Bria, she right. is talking or pledging for the idea of a new digital social contract that we need to tackle all this, the gravity of this issue. And so in her perspective, we need this for the digital society to be a healthy democratic society. What's your opinion on that? I mean, with such a big Rousseau 2.0 digital social contract save democracy?
Well, you know, I suppose some of you read that Barlow's 1996 Declaration of Independence for Cyberspace. And that really feeds into what Henriette is saying. That was the grand global ambition of that Declaration of Independence. Ideas could float free. There were no pecuniary interest in ideas floating, in attention and information and all that. And then boom, some 4 years down the line, 2000, 2001, people figured out how to capitalize our attention, and the rest is history. I think it's fair to say that I don't know if we can contract it, Henriette, as such. So that contract would be an ideal. It would be an ideal type, as Weber would call it, but we can work towards it as a beacon. I don't think necessarily, you can't force people to sign it anyway. So I think it's fair to say, like with every other global challenge or issue, the question is, what am I doing? What am I as an individual? How can I as an individual do anything? I mean, You know, I'm just one piece in a big, big puzzle. So whatever I do doesn't matter. If everybody thinks like that, nothing is going to happen. And I think we are seeing now that that is not how the next generation looks at things. I mean, look, there wouldn't have been a Me Too unless a great many people stood together and did something about it. And that started as a grassroots movement. The same goes for Black Lives Matter. So on identity politics, two ways we have seen that the community can come together and people can come together. And so we haven't done it on climate yet, quite. Greta Thunberg, yes, and a few others, and misinformation on the web, we haven't done it. But what we have to be seeing is that we have to mobilizing from downstairs, not upstairs and down. And we are seeing the next generation. I'm really proud of my son's generation and a lot of you who are out there, because you're really taking it to the next level. And that is basically what is needed. But signing a contract, all of us, yes, as an ideal and as a mental obligation, I think that is a way to go. But we are also going to have to press politicians. You're going to have to press the tech companies and press yourselves on digital education, as we were talking about in the beginning. So we are talking so many moving parts. It's not impossible, but we have to realize that this is a steep, continuous climb the way back up. And that's just the way it is. It's tough. It's just this, it's semper ardens, always burning a lot of work, and there's just no way out of it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, here we have a follow-up from Ansgar. No social contract without working public discourse. So again, how can we ensure a general audience in the storm of algorithms?
Well, look, yeah, that's another good question. Look here. I think it's fair to say that the way the algorithm is, as Ansgar is pointing to, is the algorithm, as we always are talking about, is part and parcel of the social media business model. That's what it is, and a lot of other things, but it's also that. And unless you start putting pressure on the social media, you're never going to get them to share their algorithms. And even if you got them, you wouldn't understand what they would mean, most of us. So what difference would it make? But you have to, what you would have to contract is a contract with the social media about what is it that you do and why is it important for democracy, now that you're basically running the information democracy superhighways. And that is something that politicians should be worrying about. That is something, we just had we had an election in Denmark recently. It turned out to be an election about what are we going to do about the climate? And even the politicians hadn't seen that coming. But that was only because the next generation, your generation, basically set your foot down and say, look, we're going to have to do something about that. And I think we are looking at the same sort of changes when it comes to the way in which the media platforms are curating the space in which our deliberations pertaining to democracy should run. Basically just to say, again, Ansgar, you did it with climate, but we're going to have to do it again with tech dominance. And then once we move from, and then you have to realize, Ansgar, it's one victory at a time. Okay? So it's one step at a time type of deal. You're never going to, it's not going to be everything at once. You win little battles and you aggregate them and you get to critical mass and things start changing. But that's the name of the game. And it's a long, steep uphill climb. It's a lot of work, but I don't see any other ones. We're not going to talk revolutions here immediately. We're talking about working the system. And that takes a generation of work. And that's, I don't want to ruin the parade, but I think that's the price you pay for democracy. And remember what Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst kind of government, except for all the ones that we have tried from time to time, or something like that. Because it's the best system we know that balances your individual preferences and your freedom with the best for the community. And that is a lot of checks and balances. That's a lot of work, but That's the gameplay.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. I think that summarizes what we have to do. If we had another hour, I would have loved to talk with you more about digital literacy. And I see there's also some questions on how can we rely or make the next generation so capable of seeing through all this manipulation and misinformation and being able to live in a strong democracy and be active citizens. Right. But of course, we cannot like put all of our hopes into a next generation. We need to do something right now with partnerships, as you said. And so this would be another talk, I think, to get more into the digital literacy and the media competence and skills section. But I think it was very insightful, and I'm very sorry that we have not answered all of your questions fully and completely, but hopefully it was still a very interesting hour. And from my side, thank you, and to Vincent, farewell, of course, and back to Schwarzkopf.
Thank you, Henriette. Yeah, I would say what a actually last event of this year's series, Democracy and Media, we're doing together with the Hertie Foundation. That was an amazing last talk. Thank you very much, Vincent, for this insight. And I guess I'm really keen now going home and reading the rest of the book I haven't read so far. And I think there's a lot to think and to discuss about for us, but also for like our younger audience that is a kind of the next generation somehow. And thank you very much also to you, Henriette, for the moderation. Just allow me one last thing. Follow us on Instagram or Twitter. We are there for new events or on our homepage. Monday, for example, there is going to be an amazing talk with Dia Khan. She's a Norwegian filmmaker, and she's this year's Schwarzkopf Europe awardee, and she's dealing a lot with extremism and how people deal with this or also kind of escape from this, and puts a lot of focus also on minorities. So it's a very interesting talk going to be on. Yeah, so thank you, audience, for your attention, for your amazing questions. Thank you again to you too. Thank you, Vincent, for your time, and well, goodbye to Copenhagen, I would say, and have a nice evening.
You too.
Thank you.